Okay, so I did that response video a while back to that horrible video that I don't care to mention in polite conversation, as it tends to cause me to say really impolite things. And I actually did like the structure of that video, though not the format, which is why I'm trying something different this time, using the little avatar and backgrounds from the video that I'm responding to instead. But I decided, hey, let's try something like that again, but without the drama this time. Something a little more fun and in good spirits. And so today I'm taking a look at a Screen Rant video. 20 Spider-Man Far From Home mistakes and plot holes fans missed. And I gotta say, I started this off with the intention of just being goofy and funny with it, and nitpicky in kind of a CinemaSins or CinemaSins kind of way. Maybe even doing my own little sin counter or whatever, but I'm not gonna do that this time. I'm definitely gonna do it for a future video because I think it would be a fun editing experiment, but I'm not gonna do it this time because I actually have a legitimate problem with a couple of the ones later on this list. Though saying that, I do think it's important to keep in mind that I am making this video in good fun. I don't think that there was any malicious intention behind the creation of the Screen Rant video. I just think Screen Rant makes a lot of videos, and sometimes not all of them are the quality that they should be. In fact, I actually like Screen Rant content, for the most part, at least. Most of their stuff is really easily digestible in a way that I don't have to pay all that much attention to it, really. And their pitch meeting videos, which granted are the brainchild of another creator who is just affiliated with them, are extremely funny, quick, and the perfect thing to listen to a couple of while I'm doing the dishes or something. So I'm not trying to start drama with Screen Rant or anything. I'm not mad at Screen Rant. I just feel like they could have done better, and that a couple of the points on this list are so blatantly wrong that they need to be called out. Please ignore the, I'm assuming it's cicadas outside my house, because they're really loud and making a lot of hissing noises, as we get right into this. Oh, and fair warning, there are going to be spoilers for Spider-Man Far From Home in this video.
Marvel Studios is notoriously tight-lipped about their latest projects, but Spider-Man Far From Home might have been its most secretive endeavor yet. But you don't have to look too closely to see that there was a massive movie poster mistake. In fact, someone with a single eye could probably notice that Nick Fury is wearing an eye patch over a different eye in various different movie posters.
Yes, I am already stopping the video, because one of the things that I didn't actually tell you yet about the premise of my video is that I'm going to be talking about literally every single one of these 20 points, because not a single one of them is actually a genuine mistake that this movie makes or a plot hole in the movie itself. So starting right off the bat with their first point, mistakes in the movie's posters are not actually mistakes in the movie itself.
Filming a superhero movie is no easy task. Peter Parker and Quentin Beck had a legendary showdown atop the iconic Tower Bridge in London, but a lot of what you see in the movie isn't the actual bridge. The crew was limited in terms of time, and they weren't allowed to stop traffic while filming, so they ended up building their own bridge to get the shots they needed.
Yeah, that's actually called a set, not a mistake.
The crew definitely did their research when it came to Spider-Man Far From Home, but it turns out it was far from easy in many cases. Director Jon Watts loved the idea of the school vacation and the teenage characters being a focal point in the film, so he decided to do some fun research by watching movies featuring teenagers heading to Europe for summer break. Watts claims he drew inspiration from the movie If Looks Could Kill starring Richard Grieco.
That's actually called research. Again, not a mistake.
Not only is Far From Home a movie about a group of teenagers, but it's about a group of teens who entered back into existence pretty recently. We saw a video of kids getting dusted during a basketball game, only to reappear during another one. But frankly, this raises a lot more questions than it answered. Like, what happened to the people who get dusted when they were on an airplane on their way to their own European vacation? Did they come back to life only to plummet to their doom? Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige claimed the Hulk was able to return people back to places that were safe, but we didn't see this established at any point on screen, at least during this movie.
This one actually bugs me a little bit. Like, yeah, the movie does raise some of these questions without actually answering them, but it does answer some of them, and we're going to get more into this as the video goes on, but it's clear that answering these questions was not what this movie was about. This movie is part of a franchise, one which is known to contain multiple films which answer movies from previous films of the same franchise. And at the very least, it showed that it is willing to raise those questions, which I think is evidence enough that the questions are going to be answered down the line. And either way, it's not a mistake of this movie, because that's not what this movie was about in the first place.
During Avengers Endgame, we saw what the world was like in the aftermath of Infinity War, and it was pretty darn bleak to say the least. Yet in Far From Home, everyone seems pretty cheery about what they experienced. Aunt May is working for a charity designed to help those who have been displaced by the blip, but for the most part, it seems like everyone is just kind of back to normal.
This one kind of bugs me for some of the same reasons. The characters in the movie getting on with their lives is not a mistake or a plot hole. And again, I'll touch on this again later in my video. But either way, the movie did a fine job of making it clear that things did not go back to normal for everyone. May and Peter were even two of the displaced people that this video mentions. But life does go on. People have to keep living their lives.
We also have some practical concerns regarding the blip, which were never addressed in a satisfactory manner during Spider-Man Far From Home. Have you ever had to deal with the paperwork nightmare that is filling out a passport form? Okay, now imagine that half of everyone on the world disappeared for 5 years, during which time they didn't age, but all their forms of identification probably expired. We know that Far From Home takes place 8 months after Endgame, but perhaps the most unbelievable part of the movie was that all these kids managed to get their passports taken care of in time for this trip.
Yeah, Far From Home actually addressed this, and you even pointed out where. The fact that they were able to get their passports despite the fact that their ages are in question proves that the government has some system in place to accommodate them, even if perhaps it's not a permanent one, even if it's just like a stopgap.
Of course, the blip would be a bureaucratic nightmare, but it would also be an emotional one. Could you imagine realizing you had missed out on 5 years while everyone around you grew and aged? Yet we really don't see anyone dealing with any emotional or psychological ramifications of the event. Peter is mourning the loss of Tony Stark, but that isn't really trauma resulting directly from the decimation.
First of all, how exactly is mourning Tony's death not a psychological ramification of what happened? His death may not literally be a direct result of the snap, but it's still part of the same event, at least in Peter's mind. There would be association between the two things. Additionally, the movie calls out multiple times how strange it is still for people that the characters knew to be children are now older, and in some cases older than them. Which is more than enough, considering that the movie is set 8 months after Endgame, after everyone returned. Some parts of it are even set longer into the future relative to Endgame than that, as the trip that Peter goes on in this movie takes place over his entire summer vacation. That's another 3 months on top of when this movie started, which is something that this Screen Rant video doesn't seem to take into account, even though they literally mentioned it like just a couple of minutes ago.
We know that Far From Home takes place 8 months after Endgame.
Who honestly thinks that these people would still be raw and uncontrollably emotional about what happened? Because I certainly don't. I think that after such a long period of time living their lives, they would have had to cope, at least mostly, by now. Also, Peter and his entire class were dusted. This video says that they weren't.
Then again, maybe everyone is okay because of the convenient plot armor which protected Peter and the majority of his classmates from getting dusted so that they could all stay the same age. In fact, we only got a brief glimpse that anyone other than Peter might be saddened by the events of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. His school played a memorial video featuring the lovely voice of Whitney Houston and showing images of some of the heroes we recently said goodbye to.
Literally, what are you even talking about? The entire plot of the movie was driven by the loss of the literal face of the franchise up to this point. And people in universe all over the world have been putting up banners, making documentaries, leaving little roadside shrines, honoring the life of that same character. Clearly people are affected.
But wait, Steve Rogers isn't gone, he's just really old now. Is the general public just assuming that he perished since he's not around anymore, despite the fact that he spent several years on the run following Captain America Civil War?
Okay, was that actually the mistake that you were trying to bring up in this point? Because if so, you just answered it. Cap is effectively lost, and it is possible that the rest of the world doesn't know that he's aged up the way that he is. That's not exactly an easy thing to explain, or necessarily a thing that he would want people to know. But even if this point were true, why does it matter? That isn't what this movie is about, and a movie failing to address something that it isn't about isn't a mistake.
As much as we love Marvel movies, they haven't always managed to feature the most compelling villains. We have to admit that we were pretty disappointed to learn the Vulture wouldn't be back for Far From Home, but at least we got Mysterio, though we aren't exactly sure if he's alive or not. But we do have some questions about how the blip affected existing villains like Adrian Toomes, who we saw at the prison at the end of Homecoming. If he was a victim of the decimation, does that time count towards his prison sentence? Or does he have to stay in prison for an additional 5 years?
Again, this one isn't a mistake, as it's not what the movie was about.
One of the big reveals during Far From Home was that Nick Fury and Maria Hill had secretly been Skrulls for probably at least this entire movie. But what we want to know is how long have they been secretly Skrulls? During Captain Marvel, Nick Fury said he just can't eat toast that's cut diagonally, yet during the movie Avengers Age of Ultron, we saw Fury preparing a sandwich and cutting the bread diagonally.
Oh, come on, you showed the bread. It was cut in half vertically, not diagonally. And besides, sandwiches are not toast. They can include toast, but they are not toast. Those are different foods. As for how long the two have been Skrulls, since we were shown that they were Skrulls in the end credits sequence, you know, those things that set up future movies in this franchise and always have since the franchise started, I'm satisfied that we are intended to learn in a future movie exactly what the answer to that question is. And since this clearly isn't what this movie was about, then it's, say it with me, not a mistake with this movie.
Nick Fury's toast preferences are almost as complicated as trying to film a major motion picture somewhere other than a studio. You have to factor in costs, deal with the elements, and file permits, which is one of the least exciting parts of filmmaking. Prague was eager to have Far From Home filmed there and managed to woo producers away from filming in Budapest by offering certain incentives. However, there's one thing they couldn't accommodate, and that was filming on location at Old Town Square. Instead, the place you see in the movie is actually located in Liberec, a city about an hour and a half north of Prague.
Making concessions like this to accommodate filming on location is not a mistake. It's pretty common practice from what I understand. And either way, the world of the MCU is clearly not meant to be the exact same world that we live in anyway. Oh, and his toast preferences aren't complicated. He doesn't like it cut diagonally. That's literally it.
We know that Nick Fury and Maria Hill are secret Skrulls, but what about their other accomplices? We don't really get to know these black-clad people very well, but one of them, named Dimitri, managed to stand out. If the name Dimitri sounds unfamiliar, you might know him better as the Chameleon, the very first enemy Peter Parker ever fought during his career as Spider-Man.
Yes, good. You caught that they hit a possible backdoor character introduction / Easter egg in the movie, but that's not a mistake. It's world building with a side of fan service.
Peter Parker has a lot of enemies, but he also has an impressive array of superpowers. Whether you prefer to call it his spider sense or his Peter tingle, this is arguably his most impressive ability. We finally got to see this power in action during Infinity War when it alerted Peter to the oncoming alien invasion. Yet during Far From Home, it's just kind of gone for most of the movie. In the comic books, Peter is able to willfully ignore his spider sense in order to conserve energy or focus his attention elsewhere. But in this movie, it just kind of goes away when Peter says he doesn't want to save the world, only to magically reappear later when it's convenient.
Peter was very obviously ignoring his spider sense. It was symbolic of the fact that he doesn't want to be doing what he's doing. He wants to be handling smaller crises, not giant life-threatening events. And you even point out in this video that the last time that he used his spider sense, at least notably enough that we were shown it, was when he was dragged into the whole Infinity War thing. So even based on your own criteria, this isn't a plot hole, as the movie addresses it and shows that when he needs it, he can use it freely. That's the entire reason he was able to beat Mysterio in the end, is that he concentrated and used his spider sense actively. But even if he weren't actively protesting his role in the events of the movie, spider sense has been shown to have psychological components before, not just in other movies, but in the comics too. The fact that he didn't want to be involved in everything that was happening around him could have caused him to literally lose his spider sense until he got his head in the game. And showing this happening was this movie's way of establishing this trait of that superpower in the MCU, as well as being symbolic of Peter finally getting into the headspace he needed to be in to reach his fullest potential as a hero. This is, again, not a mistake. It's just world building, and good world building at that.
Quentin Beck and his accomplices try to position Mysterio as the greatest hero the world has ever seen, and they're also intent on taking Spider-Man down several pegs. But why are they targeting this high school kid who doesn't even want to be a world-famous hero? We understand they have a grudge against Tony Stark, who they worked for during their time at Stark Industries, but why didn't they try taking on Tony when he was still alive? In fact, it seems like the reason Quentin Beck got Peter Parker involved was to get his hands on Edith. You know, the ultra-powerful artificial intelligence concealed in a pair of sunglasses? But how did Quentin Beck even know about Edith in the first place? Even if they knew about Edith, why didn't they take it when it was in the possession of somebody easier to bamboozle than a superhero who's been to outer space and fought against the Mad Titan himself?
I'm lumping these two together because they might as well have just been one point. They got Peter involved because they knew he was slated to get Edith, which they clearly learned through the established Stark Industry contacts among Mysterio's crew. He went after Peter to get Edith because he expected that Peter would be easier to steal it from than Nick Fury, and also because Edith was meant for Peter. Peter had to transfer control over to Mysterio. The movie literally explains all of this, either through literal exposition or by showing it on screen. Everything after that is because Peter found out that Mysterio was a fraud. That is also explained explicitly in the movie, and it's made extremely clear that none of it is done to get back at Tony, specifically. Especially not by hurting Peter, because what would that even do? Tony's dead. And based on everything that you said in this point and the clips that you showed, you should know this too. There is literally no way you could watch this movie and miss any of this. This point is really the only reason that I'm taking this response even kind of seriously, as it's headache-inducing how clearly whoever wrote this video missed the point of the movie. Like the rest of these, you could have called the video something different, like small details that you probably missed in Spider-Man Far From Home, though I think you did a video with virtually that same title like a week before this, so maybe that wouldn't have worked. But anyway, a title change could have fixed everything in this video, except for these 2 points, which were just blatantly wrong no matter how you frame them.
Marvel comic book fans know there are tons of timelines out there. The main timeline in the comics is known as Earth 616, or Earth Prime, but it's really just as valid as any of the other realities out there. During Far From Home, Peter Parker is thrilled to realize that the multiverse is a real thing. But is it really? We later learn Quentin Beck and his pals are really from boring old Earth 616 and not Earth 833 as he claims. Of course, this doesn't mean the MCU isn't a multiverse, but we didn't really get any confirmation either way.
The fact that this movie did not validate the existence of the multiverse, something that the comics and to a lesser extent Endgame have already done anyway, is not a mistake in this movie, as that isn't what this movie was about.
If the multiverse is a real thing in the MCU, it would open up pretty much endless possibilities, including one we have to admit we never thought was possible. During the mid-credits scene of Far From Home, we caught a glimpse of the iconic Spider-Man character J. Jonah Jameson. Not only were we ecstatic to see him alive and well in the MCU, but we were shocked to see that he was played by actor J.K. Simmons. Is Marvel Studios confirming the validity of Sony's own cinematic universe? Or was this just supposed to be a fun little cameo?
The fact that this movie did not validate the existence of the multiverse, something that the comics and to a lesser extent Endgame have already done anyway, is not a mistake in this movie, as that isn't what this movie was about.
We all know J. Jonah Jameson hates Spider-Man, probably as much as Quentin Beck and his pals probably hate Tony Stark. Which begs the question, why didn't they do their best to take down Stark Industries when he was still alive?
Because they weren't trying to take down Stark or Stark Industries. That was literally never their motivation, and you basically already asked this question once in this video already. Also, asking why villains didn't do a thing in other movies is not a mistake in this movie.
Okay, so this is one mistake you definitely noticed, but we have to point it out anyways because reasons. Peter Parker spends pretty much the whole movie protesting the idea that he could ever take up Iron Man's place. But he finally agrees to suit up while Happy Hogan puts on some epic theme music, and of course he chooses the classic song Back in Black, which was featured in the very first Iron Man movie too. Yet as you probably know, Back in Black and Shoot to Thrill are both songs by the band AC/DC and not Led Zeppelin, as Peter said. Seriously, Peter, you need to add some classics to your litany of pop culture references.
Whoosh.
We know there's no way Marvel Studios could could include every aspect of the comic books into the big screen. Of course, they're going to make minor changes and upgrades, like making Quentin Beck an ex-Stark Industries employee instead of a special effects artist. But we're pretty confused about why they felt the need to include Talos in this movie, especially considering one major aspect of his biology in the comic books. We all know the Skrulls can change shape, except for Talos. That's right, in the comic books, Talos is a Skrull who is confined to a single form.
Yeah, but this isn't the comic books, though. Plenty of characters in the MCU share names with characters who are vastly different in the comics, to the point that some MCU characters are literally amalgamations of a whole bunch of comic book characters at once, and yet are only named after one of them. Also, again, and finally, asking questions about something in another movie isn't the same thing as pointing out a mistake in this movie. So yeah, I mean, you could potentially take some of these points and extract a legitimate point of critique from them if you spin them a certain way, but as presented, none of the 20 points in this video are actually mistakes that Spider-Man Far From Home itself made. If anything, they are unanswered questions left by the MCU up to this point, which perhaps were highlighted most recently by Spider-Man Far From Home. Like, there you go. There's your alternate title. You guys could even use it if you want. Like, anyone from Screen Rant's actually going to watch this video. Who am I even kidding? My channel is like a grain of dust next to theirs. Anyway, that said, I don't really have anything more to say on this topic. I've said everything I can possibly say. Anything else would just be a reiteration at this point. I am really interested to know, though, what you guys thought of this video. Would you like to see more stuff like this down the line? I had a lot of fun doing it, so either way, I'm probably going to try a couple more of these one way or another. But your feedback will help me to determine if it's going to be like a long-running thing. So let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. We're over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.